amazing speaker from Convoy of Hope. Her name is Fortunate Zondo, and she is working with the women's empowerment and girls' empowerment, and she was raised in South Africa, moved to Scotland, and now is living in the States and working for Convoy of Hope and helping them empower women back in Africa. She has an amazing story. She moved here in the States, got her college degree, and started working with at-risk youth. And so Fortunate, please come to the stage. Frank, you're not coming up, her husband, Frank, but you need to wave to everybody. So let's give Fortunate and Frank a great Grove welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be here in Arizona, in Phoenix. So we were definitely the tourists that showed up and took pictures of the cacti, okay? I was not ashamed. I was, in fact, very proud of it. I'm not sure if Frank wanted to take ownership of the fact that I was his wife at this moment, but it was awesome to just be able to travel here from Springfield, Missouri, where Convoy of Hope and our headquarters are. So just to thank you to Pastor Palmer and your wife, just thank you so much for having us here and for the warm welcome from everyone here at the Grove. It really has been an amazing experience thus far. So as Paul said, I have the opportunity and the honor to be able to speak to you today about some of the work that Convoy of Hope is doing. And thanks to friends and partners such as yourself, we have been able to reach and impact and share the love of Jesus with over 130 million people across the globe. We celebrated our 25th anniversary last year, and since the pandemic, we've been able to share 150 million meals across the United States. We give God all the glory for what he is doing. In addition to feeding 300,000 kids a day and training farmers and responding to disasters here in the U.S. and then also internationally, I'm sure if you've checked the news recently, you'll see that there are many disasters happening in Latin America, in the Philippines, all of which Convoy is responding to right now. It is a true honor to be able to serve those in need in so many different ways. And as I reflect on what I am witnessing through Convoy of Hope, and I look at the women in my own life, and as I reflect on the sacrifices that they made in order for me to be here today, I am absolutely certain that women will change the world. Women are resilient. Girls are strong. And when someone invests in their life, we see that dignity and honor are restored in their personal lives, in their families, and in their communities. Many young lives, like myself, are born into circumstances much out of their control. So just for a moment here, go on a journey with me. Imagine that you are a girl that is born into a country in the developing world. When your family doesn't have much access to resource, when it's time to decide who goes to school, will it be the male siblings or the females? It is the males that will be selected. Because you don't go to school and you don't learn to read and write, you are now part of the 781 million women across the world who cannot read or write. Because you are home more often than your brothers and your male counterparts, you are given a disproportionate amount of chores around the house, which include walking up to 10 miles a day for clean water. Water of which you might not even drink from. It'll go to the father of the house first, then your brothers, then your mothers, then your siblings, and then maybe you. As you grow up again in the house, you are also now propositioned with the request to get married. Your family says yes. You are now a part of the 37,000 girls under the age of 18 who get married that day. There will be another 37,000 the next day and the next. You then fall pregnant. But because only 50% of sub-Saharan women have access to prenatal care, the other 50% are now exposed to unmonitored pregnancies, additional traumas. And you better hope that you did not go through genital mutilation earlier in your life. You have a couple of options now on how you're going to support a newborn. Though you are part of the 43% of women who work the farms, you only own less than 15%. So now maybe you're discouraged by the prospects of earning a substantial income. So we have a couple of options and we can look at those. Maybe you can choose to sell your body. Or B, maybe you can choose to sell your child. You are discouraged. You are disheartened. But you go home at the end of the day and work on the farm or in the streets to a household full of children. And the struggles of those children be the same struggles that you had today. And the struggles that you had today were probably the struggles of your mother years and years before. How do I educate my children? Who will go to school? How do I decide who will go to school? Will I be able to have an income that is substantial to support those in my home? Or worse. And the cycle starts all over again. But there is hope. I would like to spend a few minutes today sharing with you the story of how the sacrificial love of others and radical generosity has allowed for me to be here today speaking to you in Phoenix, Arizona. I was born in 1993 in Johannesburg, South Africa. If any of you are familiar with the history of South Africa, you will know that in 1994, apartheid was coming to an end. My father, who later died from HIV and AIDS, gave me the name Fortunate, as I was born into a white and a black family at the time. Let me help paint a picture of what it was like for an individual, a child, or an adult to grow up during the time of apartheid. In 1949, 1950, about 40 years before I was born, they had passed the Prohibition Act, which did not allow for marriage or any sexual relations across racial lines. This is 40 years before I was born. The Population Registration Act was then passed in 1950, in which all individuals in South Africa were classified into 4 categories of racial groups. The test to pass which group you were going to be determined to be in was a pencil test, in which a pencil was placed in your hair. And if the pencil stayed a little long, oh, well, you must be black. And if the pencil fell through, then you gradually moved through different categories, eventually to white. So your physical location was determined by your racial classification. And again, let me remind you, this is in 1950, 40 years before I was born. Between 1960 and 1983, that is 10 years before I was born, 3.5 million black South Africans were mass evicted from their homes. This is one of the largest evictions in modern day history. People were forced into areas, about 13% of the total land in South Africa, in which you were forced to reside, again, dependent on your racial classification. So as a young Zulu girl, Zulus were located in an area in a state called KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. The purpose of these areas called the homelands or Bantu lands was that you would live as an independent state. So all schooling was to be controlled and reinforced by that little state. So if you had resources, great. If you didn't have resources, well, too bad. This was the reality of my family. This was my family's history. My mother's only wish for my 2 older brothers and myself was that we would experience an education and opportunities that they couldn't have even dreamt of. Again, 10 years before I was born, these mass evictions happened. In 2007, in 7th grade, I was one of 4 students out of 6,000 students in South Africa to attend the International School of Johannesburg, which massively propelled me into educational excellence that my family would have never been able to afford, dream of, or even envision for a child like me. In 2009, after a personal trauma, my family decided to relocate me and my adopted siblings to Aberdeen, Scotland, where my scholarship was transferred and I finished school at the International School of Aberdeen. I was then recruited for college here in the States, and I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity. Scotland's too cold, let me go. So I came over to the US, and the school I went to was in Nevada, Missouri. Not Nevada, Nevada. Very, very small city. But let me tell you a little bit about Nevada. The KKK was relocated 6 miles out from where my college was. And the churches founded over there were founded by old white South Africans that left during apartheid. I shopped at these same places, at racist white South Africans, as a black South African girl. The irony in the story itself really set the platform for my experiences as a black foreigner here in the US. What an experience. When I asked my mothers this past week about the sacrifices that they made, their responses were very different yet similar. My biological mother, also diagnosed with HIV and AIDS, speaks of her failure to provide for me and the deep pains of her decisions amidst the circumstances of how she was unable to mother me. She says, and I quote, translated into English, "My life was very difficult and it is more difficult now. I was sick back then and I am sick now. My child, I said goodbye to you because I did not have the money for you to go to school, and with my failures, I was defeated by inaction and fired for stealing money. I am very sorry that today I still have nothing to give you and nothing in my hands that is worthy." I think of my mom often, and she reminds me of Jochebed, Moses' mother. That in the sacrificial love of putting Moses down a river, not knowing what opportunities lay ahead of him. We know how that story ends, that Moses went and changed an entire nation. But just imagine the sacrifices of that mother putting her son down a river, not knowing what was to come. I use that courage of Moses' mom and the courage of my own mother to motivate my honoring of everyone who came before me and everyone who sits before me. And then there's my grandmother who passed away 2 years ago. On the left, you will see where my grandmother lived and died, where my mother lived and then moved to Johannesburg, and where I'd go as a child. This is one of the Bantu lands. So if you think just in your head that 10 years before I was born, Zulu individuals were moved to places just like that. Imagine the prospects of kids that look like me. Imagine the prospects of women who look like my mother. Imagine the prayers and the cries of women who look like my grandmother. My supervisor shared a text with us a few days ago at work, and he said, "Some needy soul, half a world away, cried out for the things of which you are frustrated for, that you are contemplating, that you are planning and working for." I believe that there was a time that my grandmother prayed for the things in which my mother was a response to. I believe that there was a time that my mom cried and prayed for the very things in which my adopted mother was a response to. And I truly believe that there is a needy soul out there today praying for the very things in which you are a response to. At Convoy of Hope, we stand with women and girls around the world. We don't give and just hope that it works out for them. We stand with them in the mess of it all. Through our family, economic, and girls' empowerment programs, we stand alongside a woman and help them realize their God-given potentials. At Convoy, we believe in a holistic approach, so we address the whole woman's life, usually starting with some of the false beliefs that she might have, and then moving on through the program until a woman realizes her intrinsic value and that God, too, has a plan for her. Through our family health empowerment program, mothers' clubs are formed to create communities in which women can gather and receive education regarding maternal care and infant care and young health education. Through the economic empowerment plan, as you walk up today in the foyer at the table, you will see beautifully made bags. These women are empowered to start their own businesses, making jewelry, making bags. We have women in Tanzania who are selling goats, to such a point that their own micro-enterprises are now required for them to hire other people in their community. So now a different cycle continues. We have girls' empowerment programs across the world in which girls are learning about the power that they have control over what happens to their bodies, where they're learning about delaying marriage and staying in school and pursuing job opportunities. And I have the blessing of being able to work with our team in Burkina Faso, in which we just launched girls' empowerment in September. And just in the month of October, we have impacted 1,200 girls in the villages of Burkina Faso. These programs are life-changing. And on the next slide, you'll be able to see a map in which women's empowerment and girls' empowerment has been able to launch around the world, impacting over 19,000 girls and women in the last 10 years. We're currently launching a program in Guatemala, in India, and as I said, in Burkina Faso. Each picture I receive and each smiling face reminds me of a young South African girl who her too had circumstances that may have already thrown her out of a race to become anything. In our Girls Empowerment Program, there are many fortunates out there praying today. In our Women's Empowerment Program, there are many women and wives that are praying that someone might lean into what God is calling them to do, to advocate for the marginalized and the needy across the world. We are the answer to the prayers of many people out there. And as Paul encourages us in the Bible to share out of generosity for those who need. Through the example of my mothers and other mothers in the Convoy Women's Empowerment Programming, we see that every mother's heart, many women even represented in this room today, regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of geography, that a woman's heart and a mother's heart is that her child might have opportunities and love and care. These hopes and aspirations are no different than the women in our programming. Jesus' own witness of sacrificial love and his work to heal the sick and care for those in need represent God's vision for us, and that is demonstrated best through action. I cannot end today without saying thank you to you all. You have all been a longtime partner and friend of Convoy of Hope. Without the generosity and the sacrificial love demonstrated by the Grove and Pastor Palmer and every individual that is seated in here today, Convoy of Hope would not be where it is today. So I just want to thank you that you are part of transforming stories, not only mine, but those of other women. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow.